Good morning. Then, my IDE is going to give me a heck of a lot of trouble. So on test day, I would probably do them by hand, but you could use an IDE, which we've talked about. I wanted to show the scoring guidelines for these really quick so that you can kind of score your own, get used to that. So I did link the scoring guidelines here on the document for the week. Just really quick, here's the 2019 scoring guidelines. I'll just zoom in on part A since that's what we've done so far and show you the corresponding parts here. So create an array list of strings. Well, I've got that right here. That's 1 point. The next point says access all elements in array tokens, no bounds errors. So writing the for loop correctly, I think for this one, you could use an enhanced for loop. Anybody use an enhanced for loop? I think that would have been fine to use an enhanced for loop for this one because you're just looking at each element. But essentially, this point has kind of two parts. If you use a regular for loop, getting the index I, and then also using that index to access the individual elements in order. So that's kind of that second point there. The third point, comparing strings and tokens with both instance variables. So that's kind of right here where I compare it with open delimiter and where I compare it with closed delimiter. That's that third point. And then the fourth point, add delimiters into array list in original order. That's that fourth point right there. Again, for this one, there might be a little divergence if you used an enhanced for loop. You could do that. I believe that they always give you these canonical solutions is what they call them, these solutions that that they were thinking of when they wrote the question. You can see theirs. They also created an array list of strings. They named theirs D, alphabet soup variable name. Not a big fan, but we'll take it. And then they used an enhanced for loop, and they essentially said for each string in tokens, if it equals the open delimiter or closed delimiter, add that string to to the list there. So that's the answer they came up with. I think our answer looks, or my answer looks very, very similar. I just use a regular old for loop because it seems like that's what people are comfortable with. Part B. This is the one with you're checking if it's balanced. They said that this method needs to return true or false, and essentially it looks at the array list, and if there are more closed delimiters at any point than open delimiters, you immediately are imbalanced and return false. And then the second criterion is the total number of open delimiters is equal to the total number of closed delimiters when you're done looking at all of them. So the way that they give this, the examples here, they give you these array lists of delimiters. Here, I kind of did this example by hand. Again, when I do it by hand, it allows me to develop a plan in my head. This is an open one. This is an open one. So it's still valid. Open is more than closed. This is a closed one. This is an open one. This is a closed one. And this is a closed one. So it never had more closed than open, and at the end, open and closed were equal. Down here, open, closed, closed. Right at that point, and it demonstrates as well, right at that point, closed is more than open, I should immediately return false without looking at any more of them. And then in example 3, again, there's one closed, no open, so I should immediately return false. Example 4 here, I get an open, sup, I get an open, sup, and then I get a closed one. So condition 1, that making sure that closed is never more than open, does not get broken, but then at the very end, open and closed are not equal. So in my opinion, I need to loop over the word list and basically count the number of open delimiters I see, count the number of closed delimiters I see. If closed is ever more than open, immediately return false in the loop, and then at the end, compare open and closed. here's the solution that I came up with for this question. On this one, I made counters up at the very top. So open and close up here are counters. And then I said loop over all the delimiters. I used a regular for loop. I think for this question, again, you probably could use a enhanced for loop. I just used a regular for loop, seems like people are more comfortable with. And I said, yeah, if it's equal to an open delimiter, increment my open counter. If it's equal to a closed delimiter, increment my closed counter. Inside of the context of the loop, I say if closed is ever greater than open, immediately return false. I don't have an else return true. If you're wondering why that is, it would only look at the very first element and return true or false in that case. I don't want to return true until I get all the way through the delimiters list and open and close are equal. So I check if close is ever greater than open in the context of the loop because I want to be checking it every step of the way. And then at the very end, after the loop is over, I say if open is equal to closed at the end, return true, otherwise return false. And so there might have been a little divergence using an enhanced for loop, but I think you probably have something similar. The scoring guidelines for this question, again, I linked this if you walked in a little bit late here. Excuse me, Zoom. If you walked in a little bit late, I added the scoring guidelines down here if you want to check them out. But for this one, initializing accumulator, that's just a special name they have for this variable up here. So here's where I initialized my accumulator. Sorry, trying to make sure I get everybody in here. And then access all elements in the array list delimiters. Well, I've got the for loop and then this getting I, that's accessing each element. So I did that. Sorry, looks like somebody's in chat here just trying to, I can't see my chat now. That's awesome. Cool. Well, chat, where is my chat window? Okay. Great. Okay, next, sorry, got a little sidetracked. Compare strings and delimiters with instance variables and updates the accumulators accordingly. So here I compare them with OpenDel and increment my accumulator. Here I increment if it's equal to closed delimiter. And then identify and returns appropriate Boolean value to implement one rule. Here's where I implemented one rule. And then the last point is just basically, is your code all correct? So then here's where I implemented my last rule there. So to me, okay, but that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I never know, until I check it. Now, in Replit, I have my own personal little Replit account here. That's why I've got a different browser going. What I did was I put in my code here on Replit. You can run it and kind of see if you get the same answers that they have over here. And then, well, I've already submitted mine. Let me unsubmit it really quick so I can show you. If yours is then working, you can hit the submit button and it'll run the tests on it. And it'll show you that you passed the test and then you can submit it there. So that's kind of what you can do. So that's that one. There was a good question I just saw. Could I simplify this a little bit? Yeah, I could probably, instead of just having these two if state or this if else outside, I could just return open equals close, because open equals close is a Boolean expression. That would definitely be, I think that would be the way I would personally write it, is just return open equals closed at the end. Personally, I would probably use an enhanced for loop too here because I'm just looking at each element. But again, I was just trying to make it the most readable. But definitely, if you just return open equals closed at the end, you're totally good there as well. Any other questions on this one? And I showed that you can just, when it's working, you can submit it in the Replit. Good questions. Thank you, guys. I really, no matter how many people are here or not here, I truly appreciate those of you that come out and ask questions. And it makes me kind of feel like I know you guys are probably going through a lot at home and all that stuff, but just being able to do my job and answer questions is like really helpful to me right now. So I'm doing fine, but it's nice. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say there. And if you don't ask questions, you're just here watching, that's fine too. I appreciate that. Okay. If I think I answered the questions I saw in chat. I was going to move on to, so yeah, you could just return open equals closed. I was going to do the next question as well. Goodbye 2019. I did put the scoring guidelines for 2016 up if you want to click on them and look at them. You guys did number, trying to remember, number 4 here, number 3, 4, 4. Really quick, I have like a whole spreadsheet. I'm not just choosing these questions at random. I have this whole spreadsheet that I've organized based on the free response questions that they said you guys will be seeing on your test. So they said you'll see an array list of objects. I'm thinking that might be strings, because usually there's a question that utilizes strings. So I'm trying to give you guys an array list of strings problem. I'm not just, picking out of a hat random questions. So let me zoom in a little bit so you guys can actually read here. Not that I'm saying anybody can read my handwriting no matter how zoomed in or how many scientists look at it. This was number 4 from 2016. I did my best to actually work through these examples because it didn't make a ton of sense to me at the beginning. But the way I saw it, eventually I kind of figured this question out. It says you want a length of 20 string, and it gives you this word list, and you're supposed to basically space out this list of words using the same gap width in between them, and then if there's any spaces left over, add those in as well. So AP is added over here, comp sci is added here, and then rocks is added at the end. Basically, since you want a length of 20 string, and there's 14 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's 14 characters in AP comp sci rocks, that makes it so that there's 6 leftover spots. And then to figure out how you are going to divvy up these 6 leftover spots, well, you take the number of gaps between the words, and since there's 4 words, there's 1, 2, 3 gaps. There's not a gap at the beginning or a gap at the end, just gaps in between. And so you need to take 6 and divide it by the number of gaps to then figure out the basic gap width in between them. And since that basic gap width is 2, you'll see 2 spaces in between each one of the words there. So 20 minus 14 minus 3 times 2 is 0. So you've taken care of all 20. There's 20 characters taken up there. And then they give you another example, green eggs and ham. Green eggs and ham has 15 letters, so that makes there 5 left over. There's 1, 2, 3 gaps. 5 divided by 3 is going to be 1. So they do the words first, green, eggs, and ham. I'm not saying that you would actually do the words first, but there's the words. And then the spaces, you put in the basic gap with number of spaces, but then there's going to be some left over, because if you think about it, 20 minus 15 minus 3 times 1, if you're wondering where that 3 came in, there's 3 gaps. That gives you 2 left over. So you have to divvy up those 1, 2 leftover spaces, and then there's no leftover spaces here. So that's kind of, I actually did work these out by hand, and if you have the time, I recommend working them out by hand because it gives you a plan in your head on how to kind of work through these. So they give you another example down there. The first one was relatively straightforward. You're just writing a method that takes in a list of words and it returns a total. Now, some of you might have been a little freaked out, well, for many reasons, but because this one said list here instead of array list. This was back when interfaces were part of the AP test, and the list interface, interfaces are kind of like inheritance, and the array list class implements this list interface. Just don't worry about it for right now. I don't think you have to write the word list alone anywhere in your answer. Just treat this list like an array list and you'll be fine. So you're given the array list and you have to count up the total number of characters. I made a accumulator, I guess is what they call it, called total. Started at 0, loop through all the words in the word list, add it to the total, and then return that total. Could you have used an enhanced for loop? Absolutely. I probably would have, but I wanted to make mine as readable, legible as possible. One thing that people don't like sometimes is I kind of chain together a couple methods. Word list is the name of the list. I can figure out because it's right up here as a parameter. Get I gives me a single element, like a or a frog or is from their example. And then if I take that single string, that single element, and do the length method on it, then I can figure out how long it is. And so I add it to the total. There's a lot of options that you could do. You could use the enhanced for loop. You could have written total equals total plus. It's up to you there. One thing I always tell my students, make sure if the method returns an int and it says it's supposed to return something, you better return something. Make a variable and then return something. And so I obviously did do those things there. The scoring guidelines for this one. Let me zoom in. 2 points. This is an odd one that had 3 parts. Most questions don't, but this is kind of a strange one that had 3 parts. So accesses all strings and word list and add the length of each one to the accumulated counter. I think I've got the loop and I add each one to the accumulated counter right there. There's 1 point. And the second point initializes and returns accumulated count. So initializes and returns the accumulated count. So I think that gives me the second point there. Oh, why can I not? I'm so embarrassed. I honestly cannot find my chat window for some reason. It like disappears on me. I swear this is not. Don't start acting like Mr. Foster can't use technology. I just, there it is. Thank you. Oh, use a nested for loop or the max of the inner loop. Yeah, you could have, if you wanted to, you could have used an inner for loop inside there where you just, the inner for loop, you have like a J counter that goes up to word list dot get I dot, I don't know, the length of that word. You could have an inner for loop that does that, I suppose, as well. I just use the length method because that's kind of what the length method does, but I suppose you could use an inner for loop just to keep counting as long as there's, you know, more characters inside of word list dot get I. There's another way you could have done that. So what I want to try to show you guys when I go over these scoring guidelines, that's why I did it. It's not so rigid in how things are scored. There's more flexibility in how things are scored, and you can definitely get points if you did your answer differently than mine. Here's what they look for in their answer. They use an enhanced for loop. Otherwise, I think it looks pretty similar to what I got there. Part B, you're supposed to write the method basic gap width, which returns the basic gap width. I had to go back again and look at my examples, and this really is the calculation that I did. I took basically the requested length here, 20. I subtracted the total number of letters, which was different from list to list, and then I divided it by the number of gaps. Now, what is the number of gaps? That's a great question. The number of gaps is really the number of elements minus 1. So in my head, I was thinking if you take the requested length, subtract from it the total number of letters, and divide that whole quantity by the number of elements minus 1, you get the basic gap width. So I even actually wrote down that formula when I was thinking of this one. Now I did mine in 2 lines. Again, more of a readability thing for the second one here. The interesting thing about this one that you might actually see on the AP test is that they wanted you to use your solution from part A in part B. They wanted you to call the method that you wrote in part A in part B, and that's something that's common. Sometimes they want you to call a method that you wrote. Sometimes they want you to call a method that you don't even know how it works. They just tell you, here's a method, and it works. I think we'll see that in part C here. So I said that the leftovers, basically the number of spaces that are left, is the formatted length minus the total number of letters. it's a big hint here that says you must use total letters appropriately to receive full credit. I again had to go back and figure out how total letters works. Total letters requests a list of words. Since we're given the list of words right here, I sent it to total letters. I gave total letters the word list, and I subtracted from formatted len. And then to figure out how wide each gap should be, I took the leftover number of spaces and divided it by the number of gaps. This quantity right here, again, is the number of gaps. Because if you have 4 words, you need 3 gaps. If you got 10 words, you have 9 gaps. It's the spaces between them. You could have done that in one line. You could have done return in parentheses formatted len minus total letters parentheses word list, and then divided by word list dot size minus 1. You could have done in more lines, less lines, however you wanted to do that one there. But that's kind of what I came up with. The answer for this one. Let me go over the scoring guideline really quick. Calls total letters correctly and uses result. Since total letters is returning an int and wants a array list, word list, I need to send it that word list. So that's the first point, is right here. And then the second point, returns correct calculated value. I think I returned the correct calculated value there. Their answer that they came up with for this one, they just did it in one line. I know, one line show-offs over at the College Board, right? Trying to show good programming practices for everybody. And yeah, no, it's readable. There's nothing wrong with this. If you did on one line, it's totally fine. I'm just being facetious. It's all good. It's all good. So again, this is a rare question that has 3 parts. So those are the first 2 parts. The last part is putting it all together and actually writing your formatted string out. This really helped me, that I kind of worked through the example there. I see that somebody's in chat. I will respond as soon as I can actually see the chat. Everything can be done in one line. That's truer words never spake. So here you're bringing it all together in this last part. And I actually came up with a plan in my head. I don't know if I stuck to it completely, but I said make an empty string, loop over all the elements of word list, and add the words to the string, add the basic gap width number of spaces between them, and then if there's any leftover spaces, add one and decrement the leftover. I actually wrote this one and then had to think about it, and I added something in to fix it. I'll explain it there, but essentially I called basic gap width to figure out, first of all, what the basic gap width should be. I named my variable width. You could name it W. Name it something that's short but also representative. Please don't name them A, B, C, D, E, but W or width or something like that would be fine there. Don't name it basic gap width, because that's just so long and you have to write it over and over again. Try to find a nice middle ground between variable length and descriptiveness, since you might be typing it or writing by hand or whatever. So I figured out the width. I figured out how many spaces would be left over. Here they specifically said you must use basic gap width and leftover spaces. Some of you are probably like, I don't even know what leftover spaces is. I agree. They just tell you really quickly, the string formatter class also contains a method called leftover spaces, which has already been implemented. They're not going to show you the implementation. You just go, hey, it works. If they tell you there's a method that's already been implemented, you just go in the back of your mind, it works. They even give you a little bit of, it says here, leftover spaces expects a word list or an array list of strings called word list and an int formatted len. So when I called basic gap width, I sent it that stuff. When I called leftover spaces, I sent it that stuff. I stored it in left. I made a resultant string that was empty. I then looped over all of the indices in word list, and I said first add to the result an individual, the ith element word. So that's what's going on here. I first added each word to the result. I'll talk about this if statement in a moment. Then this next part, I added width number of spaces. You could have written this loop, j equals 1, j is less than or equal to width, whatever. I suppose you could have called leftover spaces right here no, excuse me, you could have called basic gap width down here, pardon me. But I don't know, I didn't want to. Thought it was going to be too complicated of a line, so that's why I made the variable up there. So this for loop that's, just these 3 lines essentially adds width number of spaces. And then after I add width number of spaces, I have to think about, are there any leftover spaces left? If there are, add a single space and then decrement the number of leftover spaces. At the end, I return that resultant string. Right when I got to the end, I go, wait a minute, there's no spaces at the end. This is going to add spaces after the final word. I don't want to do that, so I just tossed in this if statement right here, basically saying, as long as you are not the last word, go ahead and add the basic gap width, add any leftover spaces after the word. That's what this if statement I wrote in red does. And that technique, I kind of call it shoehorning. A lot of people don't know what a shoehorn is. Maybe I can pull up a picture here. It just kind of, you stick in some code that you maybe forgot, like you would a shoehorn. Maybe your grandpa has a shoehorn or something. I don't know. But if I like leaving a little bit of space between my lines, and then I can draw an arrow or squeeze in some code if I forgot it. So this if statement's basically saying, don't add any spaces after the very last word. Or only add spaces if you're not the very last word, is another way to put it. So I think there's another way to do that we might see in their answer there in just a second. But this one was worth 5 points, the second part here, or third part, excuse me. 1 point for calling basic gap width and using the results. So we've got that 1 point there. We definitely use the results. Second point, adds all strings and word lists to the formatted string in the original order. So I just loop from 0 to the very last index, and I add those words. So good there. Inserts basic gap width spaces between each pair. I think you have to do that with a for loop. I mean, I guess you could use a while loop there, but this part right here is adding basic gap width number of spaces. If you were in Python, which we're obviously not, you can actually multiply a string. Here, there's no multiplier of strings in Java, so a for loop I thought was the best way to go for adding width number of spaces. Let's see, insert 1 space between first leftover spaces pair of words. Insert 1 space, okay. So I'm going to at least insert 1 space between any leftovers there. And then initializes and returns the formatted string. So I've initialized the formatted string here, and I'm returning the formatted string. It's possible, you made a couple goofs. Think about all the points you could get if you didn't know how to do everything correctly. You could definitely, I think probably most people got this point. Probably most people got this point. Then the tricky stuff was, again, calling the methods. If you're not sure what a method is looking for, either look back at the class that they give you or these little guidelines for what a method's looking for. It shows you in the parentheses what type of variable a method is looking for, and stuff like that. So that was my answer. Again, you don't have to write out a plan. What's going on with my mouse? You don't have to write out a plan like I did. I just find writing out a plan like that. Stop. I find writing out a plan like that really helps me. Not just whether I follow the plan or not, but just organize my thoughts. Now, that being said, I know you guys are like super duper brilliant, and I'm never joking when I say that. I know you guys are. And so many of you just can do that in your head without writing it down. I'm not as fast, so I write stuff down, I work stuff out with the examples. So that's the one there. And again, if you want to look at those scoring guidelines for your own questions, they're right there. Now, one thing about this one that is unfortunate that a couple people emailed me about, and I tried to add it to the document. Unfortunately, on Replit, this question wants hyphens instead of spaces in the answer. So I originally ran mine just like you saw it, but here, let me show you. I put in, I need to undo submit for a second. Sorry. In mine, I originally had spaces like the question asked for, and I ran it, and it looked like I was doing it right, and here's my output, and it looks just like that. And then when I went to hit submit, it goes, you failed all your tests. And it's like, oh, well, okay. And what's wrong honestly didn't help me that much. But then I was like, oh, their answer shows hyphens instead of spaces. And actually, that's for some reason what Replit was looking for. I apologize if you were like at wit's end trying to figure out why yours isn't working and it looks just fine. So for this one question here, you have to add hyphens instead of spaces for that one. On the real test, it wanted spaces, and if it wants spaces, add spaces on the real test. But in Replit here, it wanted hyphens. I'm not really sure why. It might have to do with the way the tests are written or the way that they're checked. But just when you plug it into Replit, make sure you put hyphens instead of spaces there. So. Questions on, I don't know yet, Max. That's a good question. I don't know yet. That's a good question. I'm still thinking about it, coming up with ideas. But we are doing review right now, and whether people are taking the AP test or not, the review is in the AP class, and so that's what we're doing right now. And we won't be doing this after the AP test. We'll be doing something different, hopefully learning or doing something new and fun. So, but I'm still trying to figure out field trip. That would be that would be highly illegal. Field trip to the Capitol, and no, I don't even want to get into that. Never mind. Yes, this will be recorded. I am recording it, and not only will it be recorded, it's being recorded right now. Good question. So just for this one, make sure on Replit you put in hyphens. I think some of you figured it out, but I did get a couple emails. People asking. So those are 2 free response questions there. Any questions, requests from CodeHS, either some of the Unit 2 and Unit 3 stuff or the practice ones that you might have picked from those sections or any of that? You can put it in chat if you got a thing that you think of or want me to do. What was going on at 10 a.m.? There was another class that had something at 10 a.m. I'm not totally tied to doing something at 10 a.m. on Fridays if somebody's already staked out their claim. Nice. Glad you signed up for the CodeHS there. Good. Got a good question. So the problems in CodeHS, I know they do get a little repetitive. I can tell you that I went through and did them as well. It's just good. Just think of it as good practice. I think they get a little bit more tricky as we go along here, but I know the first couple sections are a little slow, and it's just good practice. So yeah, do as many as you can. Like I've said for everybody, do what you can when you can. If you do most of them, you'll be fine. Question on the 2016 free response there. If you're just walking in, what I was saying on the 2016 free response, the answer on Replit wants hyphens instead of spaces. So anywhere where you added spaces, maybe just switch those to hyphens and try resubmitting it. See if that works. Did anybody want me to do any of the, maybe there's one of these from strings 2, the practice that we can do? Replace meat. No. Replace meat. I love meat. What kind of agenda is CodeHS trying to, In this exercise, you'll be given a phrase that includes the word meat. Replace that word with the word fruit. This is definitely a problem written by the fruit lobby. If you're wondering where I just went to, I actually think some of the practice problems on CodeHS are really good. They're kind of like coding bats. Some are easier, some are harder, but you definitely haven't seen any of them before. My answers are a little bit less visible on the internet. Excuse me. So I just clicked on one of the ones that I had linked in here, strings 2, and there was a request to do replace meat, obviously by somebody from the fruit lobby here. So if I find meat, I'm supposed to replace it with fruit. Okay, so replace the word with the word fruit and return the results. I don't see anybody that have meat twice, so I'd probably find where meat starts at in phrase by doing something like phrase dot index of meat. That'll give me where meat starts at inside of phrase. Now, if there is no meat, is less than 0, aka -1, so that means that meat's not in the phrase, then I think I just want to return the phrase. Otherwise, I want to go to wherever meat started and, sorry, my brain just went, hold on, the thread's coming back. The thread's coming back. Oh, we just need to add meat in. Okay. So, sorry, I totally. So I'm thinking the result will be, we'll go from 0, we'll make a substring from 0 all the way up to where meat started, then add in the word fruit, and then go from after meat ended to the end. So maybe we'll make like to meat will be phrase dot substring from index 0 to start of meat, and then string after meat will be, this is a funny one, will be from, now that's going to be from start plus, let's see, meat is 4 characters long, so is it +4 to the end? I could just do the one parameter substring method to go from there to the end, and I think I want to return to meat plus fruit. Do I need a space? Nah. Plus after meat? I don't know. Let's see. This is a funny problem. You ever just say that? I love meat. Second instance, yes, sure. I love meat. I love fruit. I bought meat at the store. I bought fruit at the store. I think meat is healthy. I think fruit is healthy. Meet me at the meat market. Meet me at the fruit market. So I started by figuring out where meat starts using index of. This is a great problem. If there's no meat, that's what this means. Because remember, index of returns -1. If it's not there, I could have written start equals -1 as well. But if it doesn't contain meat, I just return the phrase. It looks like they didn't even test that. But and then I said up to meat is going to be from 0 to wherever meat started. Remember, the way substring works is it goes from this first number to up to, but not including the second number. And then I said after meat is going to be wherever meat started +4, because there's 4 characters in meat, M-E-A-T. Basically skip those 4 characters and start right after the end of meat all the way to the end. And basically to meat concatenated with fruit, and after meat, it's going to be like, I love blank, or I bought blank at the store, and we're inserting fruit into that blank, essentially. And if you don't like using the single parameter substring method, you could also do phrase.length at the end here. But remember, the single parameter substring method, I just wanted to put in here just to include it and remind you folks of it. If you only put one number in here, the single parameter substring method will go from that number all the way to the end. All right. There was a request to do second instance and then reverse the string. People are saying second instance. Is that find the second instance? This one here? Or is it one from, is this the second instance one you were talking about? Okay. In this exercise, you are given a string and a word. You should return the index location of the second instance of that word. If the word doesn't exist twice, return -1. So I think you can probably go a couple ways with this one. What I might do is find the index of the first instance of the word and then take a substring from where that second instance is all the way to the end and then call index of on it again. So maybe I'll do first equals phrase dot, I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but this is one way. So I find the first, where the first instance starts by using phrase dot index of. And then maybe I'll make a string rest of phrase that goes, that is the substring of phrase from, well, actually, yeah, first to the end. No. Maybe I'll do first plus key dot length. Basically, I'm trying to say, can I make this any, no? Okay, fine. I'm trying to say essentially the rest of the phrase is going to be after the first instance of key. And then, you know, I probably should put in an if statement here, say something like if first is less than 0, return -1. So if the phrase doesn't even, if key doesn't even exist in phrase, return -1. And then I want to return rest of phrase dot index of key again. Basically, cut out the string up to where you see the first, start after the first instance of key inside a phrase. That's what this is doing down here. Start after the first instance of key inside a phrase, and then look for in the rest of phrase for key. I don't know if this is gonna work. Let's just see. Some yes, some no. Computer. Mine returned 1. Oh. Do I need to add back for? No. Ideas in chat? The overloaded index of, that's a great idea. You could use like maybe last index of too. Good idea. Oh, lots of good ideas. Last index of, that's a great idea. I think the issue is it wants like the absolute location. So it'd have to be like, how dare you? How dare you, you dirty, rotten scoundrel? Oh, the double, I'm trying, yeah, that's a great idea. I'm sorry, I'm reading in chat. Jason was kind enough to share with me using the two, could use intent pause 1, then do index of string. The 2 parameter index of method. I was just trying to use, stuff that was in the AP subset. I didn't think the 2 parameter AP computer science, I didn't think the 2 parameter was in the quick reference for this year. So I was just trying to use stuff that was inside of the, yeah, just the regular 1 parameter. We could definitely solve this using the 2 parameter index of method. Where are you? Okay. I'm just trying to, what's up with this one? Vary. Expected result 5. Do I need to say something like int second equals, what if I do this? Hold on. And then I say something like if second equals -1, return. Sorry, I don't mean to talk to myself a bunch. I was just trying to come up with a solution that, let me just fix this a little bit here. Come up with a solution that stays within the AP Java subset. So I find the first time that key shows up. And if it doesn't show up, return -1. Then I make a substring that's the rest of the phrase, and say, yeah, this would probably be easier to use the two parameter index of method, but I think this is good. And so if a second instance doesn't show up, return -1. Otherwise, add the two indices together plus the length of key. I don't know. There's probably other ways to do it. I don't know. There was one more request here to do 432 reverse the string. Is that from code? Is that from the test? Is this from here? 432? No. Where is 432 reverse the string? You guys are asking me to do some problems. I'm just trying to figure out where they are. Reverse the string, is that in practice? I saw a request to do 432 reverse the string, and I don't, oh, here. Strings level 2, this one, reverse the string. Aha. 6 exercise, you're given a string and should return that string in reverse order. Okay, so what I'm thinking on this one is to write well, first of all, make a resultant string that's empty. This was in the practice section. It looks like practice string section 2. Make an empty string, and then I'm going to think I'll loop backwards through the string since I want to reverse the order. If I want to loop backwards, instead of starting at index 0, I would start at, this is the name of the parameter phrase, dot length, and I have to do -1 because remember the length is 1 more than the index of the last element, since for indices we start counting at 0. Since I'm counting backwards, I want to keep going while we're greater than or equal to 0 and have the i's go down. To get a single letter, I think we've done something like this before, but essentially I just take phrase dot substring I to I plus 1. The loop going backwards does not change that. And then I'll just add that letter to the result. You could combine those two lines there if you wanted to. At the very end, I'll just return the result there, I think. So just basically writing a loop that goes backwards from the last index, which is the length -1, all the way to the beginning, which is be index 0. This is how we get a single letter. That's a good loop to know. Make sure you guys know that one. And essentially add them to the result in that order. If you wanted to combine these two lines into one, you could definitely just do result plus equals phrase that substring I to I plus 1. Perfect. Okay, there was one more, at capacity. Can you tell me where at capacity I can find it? Is it in the practice or was it on code 8? I think that might have been a CodeHS problem here. Hold my sections. Look at me, I'm a teacher and a student, baby. You never stop. Hashtag never stop learning. Test practice. This is going to be the last one I have time for, guys. If you have other questions, you can shoot me an email or something. At capacity. Oopsie, I already did this one. So it returns a Boolean determining if a stadium is at maximum capacity. A stadium is at maximum capacity if at least 80% of the seats are sold out. So to find like the ratio of people in the seats to the capacity, since people in capacity are both ints, I took people and multiplied it by 1.0. That makes it a double. Then when I take a double and divide it by an int, this whole quantity will be a double. Now, if you don't like the whole way this is written, you could split it into separate if statements. Maybe people would be more comfortable seeing something like if, and then you could just, take this whole thing, put it inside the parentheses like that, return true, else return false is another way you could do it. If people don't like the one-liner, there's another way that I suppose you could go through and do that one. that's all I've got time for today. I want to say again, even if you only joined me for a little bit, thank you for joining me. Even if you didn't put anything in the comments, thank you for joining me. If you sent me an email, if you scheduled a time, thank you. It makes me feel a little bit more normal, allows me to actually kind of do my job. And I really do truly appreciate that from everybody. I know you guys are doing your best as well. That's why I said, do what you can when you can. Keep up the good work. So many of you are doing a great job. If you got any questions, shoot me an email. But otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I am recording this. I'll put it up. Maybe go make some snowmen or something. I hope everybody's happy and healthy. I'll get out the stuff for next week as soon as possible, and I'll see you guys soon. Adios, everybody.